Most people who dream about retiring at 55 are working with a number that is completely wrong, and not just slightly off. We are talking hundreds of thousands of dollars short of what they will actually need. That is not a scare tactic. That is just the math when you actually sit down and run the real figures. The internet is flooded with watered-down retirement advice that sounds reasonable until you stress test it against actual life. So today, we are not doing generic. We are doing specific. We are doing brutal. And we are doing honest. The core question this video is going to answer is exactly how much money does someone genuinely need to retire at 55, accounting for real variables like healthcare, inflation, Social Security timing, and investment risk. If you have been coasting on a retirement number you pulled from some outdated blog post or a 5-minute calculator, stop what you are doing, because what you are about to hear could be the most important financial reality check you will ever get. By the end, you will have a framework grounded in actual numbers, not wishful thinking, not financial fantasy. Just the hard truth that most retirement videos do not have the guts to tell you. Here is the uncomfortable truth that most retirement calculators completely ignore. Retiring at 55 is not simply retiring 10 years earlier than the traditional age. It is an entirely different financial challenge, operating under an entirely different set of rules. When someone retires at 65, financial planners typically model for a 20 to 25-year retirement horizon. That is already a stretch for most savings plans. But a healthy 55-year-old today could realistically live another 35 to 40 years. That means your money needs to work nearly twice as long as conventional retirement wisdom assumes. And here is where the stakes get genuinely dangerous. If you miscalculate your retirement number by even 10 or 15%, you are not just running a little short. You could be completely out of money in your late 70s or early 80s, with no income, no safety net, and no real way to recover. Here's the uncomfortable truth that the financial industry doesn't exactly rush to put on a billboard. The retirement formula that millions of people are blindly following was never designed for the life you're actually planning to live. We're talking about a rule built on decades-old data, stress-tested against a 30-year window, being handed to people who could easily spend 40 or even 45 years in retirement. That is not a minor miscalculation. That is a structural failure hiding inside a spreadsheet that looks completely fine on the surface. And if you are nodding along thinking your financial advisor has already accounted for this, I want you to seriously ask yourself when they last ran your numbers against a 40-year horizon with real inflation, real sequence of returns risk, and real healthcare cost projections baked in. Because the difference between retiring on a plan built for 30 years versus one built for 40 years is not a rounding error. It could be the difference between financial freedom and running out of money in your late 80s. So if you want to actually retire early and stay retired, you need to stop treating the 25 times rule as the finish line and start treating it as the absolute bare minimum starting point. Let me be brutally honest with you right now, because nobody else is going to say this to your face. The vast majority of people who think they are ready to retire at 55 are completely wrong, and they will figure that out far too late to do anything about it. Retirement planning is not a casual exercise you knock out on a Sunday afternoon with a cup of coffee. It is the single most consequential financial decision of your entire life, and if you get it wrong, there is no reset button. There is no second chance, and there is no safety net waiting to catch you. Every year you delay understanding these numbers, Every year you assume things will somehow work themselves out. You are gambling with decades of your life. The people who retire comfortably at 55 did not get lucky. They got ruthlessly specific. They got uncomfortable with hard truths early, and they built a plan that actually held up under pressure. So if you are serious about making this work, pay close attention to everything that follows, because what you are about to learn could be the difference between genuine financial freedom and a retirement defined by regret and compromise. Now here is where early retirement gets genuinely expensive in ways most people never see coming. Healthcare. If you retire at 55, Medicare does not begin covering you until age 65. That means you are privately funding a full decade of health insurance entirely on your own. So what does that actually cost? A healthy 55-year-old purchasing a mid-tier marketplace plan today can expect to pay somewhere between $600 to over $1,000 per month in premiums alone. Add deductibles, co-pays, prescriptions, and dental, and you are realistically looking at $15,000 to $25,000 per year. Over 10 years, that is anywhere from $150,000 to $250,000, and that is before accounting for healthcare inflation, which historically runs higher than general inflation. This single variable alone can add $250,000 to your retirement number, which is why ignoring it is simply not an option. Now here is where things get really uncomfortable. Even if you nail your budget perfectly, inflation is quietly working against you every single year. At just 3% annual inflation, your purchasing power gets cut in half, roughly every 24 years. So that's $70,000 you plan to spend annually at age 55. By the time you are 80, you would need nearly $155,000 just to buy the exact same things. Over a 35-year retirement, that difference is absolutely devastating to your savings. And remember, not all inflation hits equally. Healthcare inflation consistently runs at double the general rate, sometimes reaching 6 to 7% annually. Housing costs follow a similar aggressive pattern. This means your retirement number cannot simply reflect today's prices. It must be adjusted significantly upward to account for decades of rising costs. Otherwise, you risk running out of money precisely when you are most vulnerable and least able to return to work. Now, here is a piece of the puzzle that catches most early retirees completely off guard: the Social Security gap. When you retire at 55, you are not just leaving your paycheck behind. You are also walking away from Social Security income for years, potentially over a decade. If you claim at the earliest possible age of 62, that is 7 years of zero Social Security payments. But if you wait until 67 to claim full benefits, which is often the smarter financial move, that gap stretches to 12 years. And here is why delaying actually matters. Claiming at 67 versus 62 can increase your monthly benefit by roughly 30% or more. Over a long retirement, that difference compounds into tens of thousands of additional dollars. So your savings must completely cover those gap years, which significantly raises the total retirement number you need before ever walking out that office door. Let's put all of this together with a real example. Say you want to spend $70,000 per year in retirement starting at age 55. Using the 4% rule, that gives you a baseline number of $1.75 million. But we are not done. Add a dedicated healthcare buffer of roughly $400,000 to cover that decade before Medicare kicks in. Now factor in inflation adjustments over a 35-year retirement, which pushes your effective spending need closer to $90,000 annually in today's dollars. That bumps your portfolio target up to around $2.25 million. Then account for the Social Security gap. Without that income for 7 to 12 years, you need an additional cushion of roughly $150,000 to $200,000. Your realistic total? Somewhere between $2.4 and $2.5 million. Surprised? Most people are. Now here is a risk that even financially savvy people often overlook, and it could be the most dangerous threat to your early retirement. It is called sequence of returns risk, and it refers to the timing of market downturns, not just whether they happen, but when they happen. Imagine retiring at 55 and immediately facing a major market crash in year 1 or 2. Even if the market fully recovers over the next decade and your long-term average returns look perfectly fine on paper, the damage may already be done. Here is why. When you are withdrawing money during a downturn, you are selling assets at depressed prices. Those sold shares can never recover for you personally. A bad first decade forces you to liquidate more of your portfolio just to cover living expenses, permanently shrinking the base that future growth depends on. For early retirees with potentially 4 decades ahead, this timing risk is absolutely critical to understand and plan around. Now that you understand sequence of returns risk, let's talk about how your portfolio should actually be structured at 55. This is where a lot of early retirees make a critical mistake. They hear retirement and immediately shift everything into bonds and conservative holdings, thinking they're being responsible. But remember, you potentially have 35 to 40 years ahead of you. Being too conservative too early is genuinely dangerous. If your portfolio barely grows, inflation quietly destroys your purchasing power over decades. On the flip side, being too aggressive leaves you exposed to exactly the sequence risk we just covered. The sweet spot for most 55-year-old retirees tends to sit around 60% growth assets like stocks and 40% stable assets like bonds and cash equivalents. This balance keeps your portfolio growing while providing enough stability to weather early downturns without permanently damaging your long-term trajectory. Here is something that changes the entire retirement equation. You do not have to fund every single dollar of your retirement from savings alone. Alternative income streams can dramatically reduce the total number you need to accumulate. Part-time consulting in your former field, even just 10 hours a week, might generate $30,000 to $50,000 annually. Rental income from a property can cover a significant portion of monthly expenses. Dividend-focused investing creates passive cash flow that works alongside your portfolio withdrawals rather than depleting principal. And passion projects, whether that is writing, coaching, or selling a craft, can generate surprisingly meaningful revenue. Consider this. If you bring in just $2,000 per month from outside sources, that reduces your annual withdrawal need by $24,000, which under the 4% rule means you need $600,000 less saved. That is not a small adjustment. That is a retirement transformation. Here's something the financial planning world rarely admits. A significant number of people who retire early end up going back to work within 2 to 3 years, and it has nothing to do with running out of money. It comes down to identity. For decades, your career has defined your schedule, your social circle, your sense of purpose, and your daily structure. The moment that disappears, many people feel completely lost. Without a clear answer to the question of how you will spend your time, retirement can feel surprisingly empty. And here is where the financial calculus actually shifts. If you return to work even part-time, even doing something you genuinely enjoy, that income changes your withdrawal rate dramatically. So before finalizing your retirement number, you need a life plan alongside your financial plan. Purpose is not a luxury in early retirement. It is a financial variable. Now that we have walked through all the major variables, let us put them together into 3 clear tiers so you can find where you personally land. For a lean retirement, spending around $45,000 per year, you are looking at a target number somewhere between $1.4 million and $1.7 million. That covers the basics without much room for extras. A comfortable middle ground retirement, closer to $70,000 annually, puts your target between $2.1 million and $2.6 million. This is where most people realistically want to land. For a more luxurious lifestyle, spending $100,000 or more per year, expect to need $3 million to $3.8 million, possibly higher depending on your healthcare situation and location. These ranges are not arbitrary. They are built from everything we have covered: the withdrawal rate, healthcare bridge, inflation buffer, and Social Security gap, all factored in together. If retiring at 55 is your goal, and you are currently in your 40s or early 50s, the time to act is right now, not next year. First, target a savings rate of at least 25 to 30% of your gross income. Every additional percentage point you save today dramatically shortens the gap between you and financial freedom. Second, prioritize account types strategically. Taxable brokerage accounts become critically important because retirement accounts like a 401k carry penalties for withdrawals before age 59 and a half. Roth conversions during your peak earning years can also create tax-free income later. Third, and perhaps most importantly, stop trying to figure this out alone. A qualified financial advisor can build a detailed, personalized retirement projection that accounts for your specific expenses, tax situation, and investment timeline, turning your goal from a dream into an actual executable plan. One last thing before you go. If you have ever watched a cartoon or a sitcom where a character retires early, sails off into the sunset, and never thinks about money again, please do not use that as your financial blueprint. Real early retirement takes serious planning, honest math, and a willingness to make trade-offs today so that future you can actually enjoy the freedom you are working toward. The numbers we covered in this video are not meant to scare you. They are meant to ground you in reality, so your plan actually holds up for 30, 40, or even 50 years. So skip the cartoon logic, do the real work, and build something that lasts.